When these things prevent others from having their basic needs met, your creation is corrupted. Help us to keep our eyes open to this temptation of consumerism. Help us to be followers of Jesus who are focused on the important and simple things in life. Christians who care for others and are willing to share our riches with those who have unmet needs. Give us the courage to go against our culture when it confuses wants and needs. Remind us that when the journey of life in this world is complete, we take with us only what we have built inside ourselves. Treasures of the heart, love and generosity, friendship and concern, caring and sharing. We pray for these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
So today we're going to be talking about seekers and first followers and permaculture and the transition movement. And to get us started, Jenna, first, and the team that helped to create this awesome meeting was the pod number 4, I believe, already. So would the pod please rise? And could you guys just say your name and kind of describe like one experience or nature with your guide?
Okay, I'm Catherine. In terms of nature being my guide, I would say like, I do a lot of like trail running, and if you're just at like Haverford, it's not a big deal, but some of the more dicey trails, you definitely have to be more aware of what's going on around you nature-wise. Like if you're running along the street, you can be in your own world, but in nature, you have to tune in more. So I guess in trail run.
Okay, I'm Siobhan. I guess I kind of let nature try to lead me every day. Nature tends to set my mood. I let nature try to speak to me. So I try to be open to what it has to say.
I'm Melissa, and I really like to play in the rain, and that kind of guides me because it puts me in a really happy mood.
My name is Andrea, and I went running like a week ago, and I didn't really know where I was going, and I found like this like random like koi pond and babbling brook, and I didn't really know where I was. I didn't really feel lost because I don't know, everything just seemed like in place.
My name is Michelle, and this nature guides me in also sort of what Siobhan was saying, like the weather each day. It's just like not so much like regulating my mood, but also like each morning when I wake up, I like go outside and notice like, oh, it's nice out. It's sunny, or like at night you can see the stars. It's like it just makes me really happy.
Great, give them a round of applause. Awesome. So now Jenna is going to give us some phrasing, and can someone also turn on the lights?
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so the general theme for today's meeting is the principle of seekers and first followers, and it kind of draws in line a lot of the stuff we've already laid out, especially referring back to the idea of servant leadership, because what goes on with servant leadership is again that change in power and expectation, contrasting what it means to be a leader, how we constantly think of that, with what it means to be a servant, and how we constantly think of that. Usually leadership here, your servants are down here. So the idea of being a seeker and a first follower kind of nuances that a little bit and draws that out. And it's the idea that to be a leader is to be passionate about something and to be, you can't be a leader unless you know what you stand for. So it's your relationship to your cause, or your relationship to your way of being in the world. But there's a whole bunch of different ways that you would choose to be in the world, and a whole bunch of different causes that you would choose to take up with. And so it's not that like one day you wake up and you're like, oh, like, this is my calling in life, or like, I'm gonna, take a stand on this heels. But it's that idea of really being in tune with what you're drawn to and what resonates with you. And in order to do that, before you can go out and lead in a certain direction, you have to know where it is that you feel passionate, and before you even know where it is that you feel passionate, you kind of have to just be open to the different directions of possibilities out there. So the idea of being a seeker is the idea of doing that preparation of yourself and that kind of formation of yourself. A lot of times we think of leaders as people that can just pick up and run in a certain direction. And to ask for help is often seen as like in the middle of something that's like a lack in yourself. And it's almost like, oh, I can't handle it, so we don't like to ask for help. But the idea of being a seeker is being open to the forces and the people and influences around you in a way that you can receive them and be shaped by them. So it's the idea of formation and preparation, and the recognition that what you see on a day-to-day or the way that you experience things doesn't have to be the only way that things can be experienced. So the world that you see doesn't have to be the world that could be. So it's that openness to the possibility that things could be different, but also an openness to the forces that draw and influence you in different directions. And so to be a certain leader, first there's that option of being open to a different kind of possibility, a different kind of reality, but also the drawing into yourself of what does it mean to be influenced by this. So it's the preparation and formation piece. And once you begin that, then the first thing you're not going to do is like jump up and be like, I've got it under control. It's the idea of being part of a larger community, being part of a larger movement. It's like what Dr. Cato was saying last week with Garden Tide, the idea that she only was who she was because of her relationship within the larger community. And it was that movement and that collective assembly that granted force and power and voice to the Greenbelt movement. So it's the idea of sometimes it's not about being the representative of that voice. Sometimes it's being that collective member, that collective identity behind the voice. And oftentimes the best way to support a movement or to lend power and passion to something is to simply by joining on that collective and communal level. It doesn't always have to be the idea of an individual leader, but what does it mean to be a first follower, which is oftentimes very risky, to be the first one to say, like, I hear what you're saying, like, I'm down with the cause, and like put yourself in someone else's camp. Or sometimes it involves just putting yourself in collective community with people. But it's the idea of being a leader through collective relationship instead of an individual position. So that's what we're looking at today.
All right, guys, actually. To elaborate a little, many of you were not here, actually, the first time we've delved into the seeker first follower dynamic last fall. And one of the cool things that we used was a YouTube clip. And we have a lot now to show, so we're not going to show it then. But the gist of it, it says Leadership Lessons from the Dancing Guy. I really recommend you look it up. Some of you remember this. I can see smiles on your face. What do you remember, Melissa? Yeah, see what you got. Just
So there's this crowd of people sitting down, and then this man stands up and starts dancing by himself, and it looks really creepy. And then one other person comes up and is dancing with him, and maybe like two more people. People keep going to me in the middle of the really inspiring.
it's crazy, right? But it demonstrates, we go back to the first ideas in the semester, the prophet. Sometimes the prophet may be a lone nut, as they say in that video. This guy was one lone nut dancing. And that prophet, the person whose ideas are a means to healing, like collective healing, they're not a leader until somebody has the courage to say, yes, I see it, this is right, I'm getting behind this, I'm going to take that risk. But as Jenna was alluding to, that just doesn't happen if you're not doing some work always, some reflective interior work and the seeking, right? So you're always you may not consciously know what it is, but a part of you is looking for something, right? Looking for that prophetic figure, looking for that prophetic idea, looking for that means towards greater fulfillment and healing. And ironically, as much as this material is going to try to be an example of that, my story as to how I came about understanding this happened that way. In that I was advising a trip to Costa Rica through our service break program, which is the environmental service trip, in the spring of 2010. And we got down there there's this, Rancho Mostactal is this amazingly beautiful and simple, elegant sort of eco-village that has been built up a little bit over time. And the first night we're arriving in the rain and we don't know what's going on, they're saying, "You're staying in the hooch." I'm like, "Hooch? It sounds like I'm in trouble, right?" Sounds like it's like a chicken coop or something. But it's this triangular sort of bamboo structure built into a hillside. And I wake up in the morning and I'm surrounded by the rainforest. And I'm taken aback because it's just right there. My alarm clock is the insects and the birds and the sun and everything else. And it was all flowing together. And the longer I was there, the longer I learned that those things are designed intentionally, because that place founded itself on ideas of permaculture. So it's actually sort of simple to understand and at the same time complex to understand. So I'm going to start us off with some videos that give you a visual way of seeing what happens with it first. But essentially, it's a sustainable design system that originally began with agriculture, and those ideas work for any real system. And now we've applied them to a human being structure their lives and interrelate with everything else. It's an integrated, holistic design system. So with that, we're going to go to this first video. Yep. And and if you can expand it, we'll let it speak for itself.
Salted landscape, 400 meters below sea level, the lowest place on earth, 2 kilometers from the Dead Sea, right, to about 2 kilometers where Jesus was christened. Hardly got any rainfall. We've got temperatures in August that go over 50 degrees. Everybody's farming under plastic strips. Everybody's spray. Everybody's putting synthetic fertilizer on. Over graze it goes, just like maggots eating the flesh off the bones, down to the bones of the country. Literally like maggots, giant maggots eating into nothing. So we designed up a system that would harvest every single bit of rainwater that fell on 10 acres. There's 1.5 kilometers of swale, water harvesting ditch on contour. And when they're full, 1 million litres of water soak into the landscape. And they'll fill quite a few times over a winter. And then we heavily mulched those swales with organic matter, which was trash from organic fields nearby. We put that almost 1/2 metre deep. So we saved that and mulched our swales, which are about 2 metres wide and 1/2 metre deep on the trench. Then we put micro irrigation underneath the mulch. And then on the uphill side of the water harvesting trench, we put nitrogen fixing very hardy pioneer desert trees, which help shade and reduce wind evaporation, and also put nitrogen into the soil and structure the soil for us. And then on the lower side of the trench, we put fruit trees, majoring in date palms as the long-term overstory in the end. And then we put in figs, pomegranates, guavas, mulberries, now some citrus. Within 4 months, we had figs a metre high with figs on, which is impossible. We've done a course, male and female course, trained up some locals, and we've got a translator who's working for the project. He has his degree in agriculture in the Jordan University. And he got onto his mates and said, in the agricultural department, well, he said, we couldn't grow figs, we've got figs growing around, we've got figs on them. You better come test the soil, because no matter what you say, we're either growing in salty soil, what we shouldn't be growing, or we've desalted the soil. And we don't know what we've done. They came in and the salt levels were dropping. So they became interested. The salt levels were dropping around the swales. They said you must have washed it through. See, normally a huge amount of water on wash the salt through to the lower levels, which just makes the groundwater more salty. In the end, you'll salt it 20 metres deep if you keep doing it. And then it will take 1,000 years to recover. And we use only 1/5 the amount of water. So the water, they thought we'd washed it all through. No, we'd use 1/5. That really got when they realised how much water we hadn't used. With the same amount of water normally used on that much area, we could have done 50 acres. Originally, people laughed at us because we didn't put straight lines in. We went on contour with these swales. They thought, why didn't you put straight bulldozers? You can flatten the desert, you can straight. So we want to go on contour because we've got a longer area, we harvest the water passively. Then we planted more non-fruit trees than we did fruit trees. So they laughed at us. Unproductive things, non-productive things, what's the point, you know? In soil, when you grow anything, so. And then we covered all the inside of the swell mulch where they scrape all their organic matter off and burn it like most traditional agriculture. In the middle of winter we got a funny email saying, we've got mushrooms growing in the soil. But they called it fungus. But when we saw a photograph of it, it was mushrooms, because they'd never seen mushrooms, because they've never had that much humidity in living history in the soil. And when you open up the mulch, there's all these little animals there, there's little insects, and the soil has come alive. And the fungi net that's underneath the mulch is putting off a waxy substance which is repelling the salt away from the area. And the decomposition is locking the salt up. And the salt is not gone, it's become inert and insoluble. So we could regreen the Middle East. We could regreen any desert. And we could desalt it at the same time. And if we could do it on an insignificant, flat, little bit of 10 acres of flat desert, if you give us something a catchment or a wadi or canyon or any of those erosion valleys, we can turn it vibrant completely. You can fix all the world's problems in a garden. You can solve them all in a garden. You can solve all your pollution problems and all your supply line needs in the garden. And most people actually today don't actually know that, and that makes most people very insecure. So these examples have to be set so that the world can have a positive future. But we have to explain that unless this soil management is fully demonstrated, extended and enhanced, then we don't have any future. The world's just going to turn to dust.
Stop and ask, what did you guys notice in that part of the video? If you can get just to the list of scrolling words, that'll be fine. So what stood out to you guys? What shocked you? What was new? What surprised you? What did you think of that part of the video right there?
That it's possible.
That it's possible to do what?
To take an arid land, make it sprout forth fruit. That's awesome.
Right, so where it was thought to be impossible, we can bring forth the possible. And I don't think it's any small irony that it's in the Dead Sea, the hottest, one of the most inhospitable climates on Earth, and also the cradle of most of our Western religions and civilization in that area. So there you go, right to the beginning of it. Yeah, hit that real quickly. Just give you some context of what's going on and why this is not just a small deal in that area.
So we went in and had a look and we go, oh no, this is like...
That's what you want.
Okay, I clicked on it.
Okay, well, until it clicks over, maybe hit mute until you can figure out how it clicks over. What else did you guys notice? Anything?
This is the end of it.
You saw what I saw, right? Yeah, Mark.
For me, it wasn't even that it was impossible. It's that it didn't even come into my reality. Like to think that like the desert's the desert. Like to think that it can be like reforested and replanted. So like it's kind of like what Jen said, thinking outside the realm of possibilities. Because like for me, it never even came to my mind. It's just like, oh, the desert, that's how it's been. That's how it is. So I never even came up with the thought of like why don't we try to plant or try to fix it?
Yeah.
It never came to you.
Right. Anyone else? Yeah.
I was surprised at how quickly
Jess,
they
shut
said
it
it
down.
would take for, like they said after 4 months they were already like planting the first trees, which got surprising. I had heard about greening the desert and trying to make arid deserts
Yeah, right. Again, thoughts of like how we know things to be. So, anyone else, things you observed? It's okay? Behind me.
I just think it's inspiring the perseverance that the group had to keep going despite the fact that there was so much negative attitudes towards what they were doing, people disbelieving, just like even when growth started to happen, that no, like there was just little faith from other people, and but they were able to show everyone wrong, prove everyone wrong. And I think that being able to face that and then just like keep going and persevere with it is applicable in a lot of these situations.
Yeah, and what faith did the people, those outside the project, what do they have faith in?
People who are planting?
No, the ones who didn't.
Oh, I mean, I just think that they didn't have faith that anything could grow in this area, but also that.
It's okay. Good. Yeah. What I was going to kind of get at is I want to bring back the story a little bit. So you've seen what I'm talking about now. And the story behind permaculture is it's actually very countercultural, as Caitlin was highlighting, right? There was a lot of resistance to it because this isn't how things are done. This isn't how we know things are. Like, this is foolish. Like, why would you plant trees that aren't actually producing fruit? What's the point? We don't get it. Our cultural mindset doesn't see that. But in the 70s, there are these two men, Bill Mollison and Robert Holmgren, who were working in Australia and looking at how communities survived, the Aborigines, off that landscape for so long. And what they did is they discovered something that is really why we're connecting this to a part of servant leadership today. They looked at the fact that the way that they lived listened to nature and the land. They had figured out by observing and by being immersed in it day in and day out how things worked. Okay, and we go back, remember Wangari Maathai, where Dr. Kieda was talking about what was so powerful and what made her different is she listened. She listened to what was going on the ground, maybe even in the ground, right? Where are the trees? This life is being devastated. So a part of being a seeker and a first follower is being a really good listener, a very attentive listener, ready to really take in something new and put on hold our assumptions about the way things are or should be. Ideas, like conventional farmers or agricultural experts, who took for granted because, well, human beings through science and certain studies figured this out. But what was absent from much of this project, and we can take a look at it on the second page of your graph here, looks at the characteristics of industrial culture and sustainable culture. Much of the way the prior thinking was from thinking we've had for the last 200 years or so, right? It's really come out of a lot of different things. But in essence, what Bill Mollison really came out with when they studied how nature works, how it actually, life can thrive in a place where there is no life. He figured out these 12 principles of how natural systems operate and thrive. The next page. These are your 12 design principles. And what they are is, the first one is no mistake that it's first. It's observe and interact. Like a good servant leader, it has a disposition of openness and of humility. You're looking to see, much like Wangari did, what's going on the ground. What is the ground telling you? The people on the ground, the land itself. Instead of, like he alluded to, bulldozing everything and doing it your way, right? In which case, they need to keep adding more and more kind of toxic or destructive things for the amounts of water, to the pesticides and the chemical fertilizers, you name it. But if you listen and you see this, you can work with nature. So part of our servant leadership lesson for the day is to be a seeker and a first follower in the context of creation and the cosmos and the common good, is to understand that what we are listening to and following is nature as our guide. right? Nature as the measure of success, as the measure of how things are done well, of how things actually become abundant and life-giving. And we can choose to work with that. And so we see it, and we've seen it here in sort of agricultural settings, but when we talk a little bit later about the transition initiative, where these towns are making a transition to a more abundant, local, and simple sort of energy way of life, it's because it was based out of these principles. So we'll get to that at a certain point, but here's just some facts. So can you pause it? Yeah. When he says that it's very significant, you know, that all the world's problems can be solved in a garden, that's no joke in Jordan. Look at these statistics, right? Population 5.4 million, 92% of the land is desert, and that percentage is growing. Remaining area in the highlands, you know, the lowest place on earth. Most of the population is on 3% of the land. Keep going, sorry, Jess. It's one of the most pro-Western countries, so that can have some influence on how they choose to adapt certain ways of doing things, like their agriculture, right? World Trade Organization states that social classes, the division between them is increasingly stratified, right? So these social issues are emerging. They have refugees that are influx from now Syria, obviously, but previously Iraq. Jordan has the lowest levels of water availability per capita in the world, right? And they are withdrawing more water from their aquifers than it's keeping and producing. It's going dry, right? So, and most of the irrigation that they do is drawing out of this. A large amount of Jordan's agriculture draws from this water. But the agriculture that they have is industrial agriculture. And so on that little graph that compares, you can see the conventional way of the West in particular of doing its relationship with the ground, the land, with nature, follows that format, and it's having destructive consequences. So let's see what time we have here. I think what I would like to do, yeah.
Just out of curiosity, this guy, Jeff, what is his name?
Yeah.
What does he do? Like, what did he study?
He's a permaculturist. So he's come up from Australia studying that for a long time. He does most of this around the world. And there's another video, I wish I could keep showing you all of them, where he's set up these schools in developing countries to actually train the locals. And then the locals have a school where people from more of the developing world can come and pay to work and learn these principles and learn how to do permaculture, so that not only is permaculture spreading to the way that they're becoming self-sustaining and gaining more abundance and value from the land in a healthier way, but they're actually having a more sustainable economy, taking advantage of being an example of inviting guests and students in from the West, or developing world. This is a very short one, but it just shows a particular community in the United States, and it gives you a picture of what it looks like a little bit more on this continent here, and what people do and how they're involved. It's got more info in there that I will hopefully abstract from it. But before I get into that piece, below it is something called the permaculture flower. And that's because these principles, the 12 principles work because they acknowledge that things are all, right? What do we start the semester in this entire Servant Leadership Workshop on? That fundamentally, as a spiritual and even a material truth, all things are connected, and in some way, shape, or form, they're all one. And a recognition of that allows us to more easily listen to Mother Nature as our guide, and allows us to more easily see how all of the things that our world is an integrated place, that each of these aspects of a human community that gives life and flourishing to our lives, they're connected with one another. And these same principles, right, they just don't work in nature, they work period, because they're what we call integrated systems thinking, or whole systems thinking, which means we don't just look at the individual parts, we look at the relationship as one whole, and how things flow from one another, right, into the other, that there's connections going on, and those connections can be beneficial or harmful. Go ahead, Jess, yeah. Can speed through some of this, like a couple 20 seconds or so.
There's many one-liners in terms of what's permaculture, and I think my favorite one is really, it's a design science rooted in observation of natural systems, and to learn how to design how we live that has the stability and the resiliency of a natural ecosystem. The three ethics are care of the earth, care of people, and basically setting limits to population and consumption, and reinvesting surplus back into the system. We focus on agriculture a lot because that's something that we can't interface, and it's such an incredible reflection of interconnectivity. It's the best vehicle for going back to connecting back with nature, back to the earth, through our food, through our medicine, but also through our building materials, through our relationship with animals, through our relationship with each other, through our local community. I mean, it's a huge conversation that you can just, have agriculture at the core of that and talk about economy and finance and trade and, ecology and community and how do we get our needs met? What are our needs? And, how can we get this met in a way that isn't going to be poisoning everything and destroying everything? And the good news is, the solutions are here. They're available on every scale. And what we're holding, I think, are practical on-the-ground solutions that we can do on any scale. Individual scale, like I get up in the morning and I decide, what am I going to consume or not consume today? Where am I going to buy my food if I don't grow my own? Or how do I start growing my own food? Or if I'm going to go buy something, what's the impact of that product on the environment? So we're trying to open up people's eyesight and expand their awareness, give them a few tools so that they can go on their own journey into the world, and they'll find their own learning path of what they have in the toolbox, a little toolkit that they can take with them to go and build their own little permaculture systems, or build their own life journey that will help be of service to the greater community and to the future generations. That's what we're doing.
Researching this last night, going through what to pick for you guys at home. And my one roommate, he's really a guy who gets fired up a lot in here. It's what we're doing. And he's been saying that over, it's a meme now for him. He's spreading it like crazy because he's a youth minister. And he went here, he's a 2008 grad. He was like in charge of whatever, Special Olympics, orientation, you name it. He's like, it's what we're doing. So it is what we're doing. It is what they're doing. And there's something very countercultural about it. One of the videos that we're probably not going to have time to see is about this group of literally like punk rockers in Mexico City who are doing this as a form of social protest, a form of being countercultural. So part of what's going on behind this, why it hasn't been adopted, is just sort of, it appears to be common sense when you see the abundance that's right in front of you. But our current culture doesn't see the way things work like that. So there's something very countercultural about this. Bill Mollison himself, the original founder, actually went off into the wilderness to just live alone. He couldn't take the world as it was in the early 70s. And he sat there and he's like, he's kind of a real brusque Australian. He was like a school teacher and a forester, and kind of, he's got, a mouth on him. And he's just like, well, I was sitting there, I was thinking, if I just do this, those bastards are just going to roll the whole thing over, meaning like the earth itself. He's like, I can't do that. I got to go back out there. I got to fight. And then I took some time to think about how I was going to fight. And what he started to do, and what has continued to happen, and why we don't know this through mainstream, is he worked on the grassroots, where people could apply this, see it, share it, and let it expand from there. And it's a global movement now. And you can see in some of the principles, the very way you would design a movement that functions is in there, right? Valuing diversity, using edges in the marginal. And we talk about the marginalized and Jesus' preferential option for the poor, and there's a lot that we can draw out of that. But the idea is the margins and the edges are the places where exchanges happen, right? Where the nature finds a way to have the most surface area possible. Go look at a tree and look at how it maximizes its exposure to the air which it needs to live and breathe, right? Look at how you would think those ditches they were talking about, putting a farm in just the lines is the best way of doing it. But they went on a line here because between, say, 1,000 yards, you could have a straight line of a ditch that harvests 1,000 yards, or you could have 2,000 on a squiggly line where it all tracks in. But it's not linear thinking. It's not A equals B, which is, and everything else is kind of irrelevant, which is how we tend to think. So, anyone have any questions or observations you want to pull out of that really quickly? Because hopefully that made a little bit more sense from what they're trying to do, because we can locally try to meet more of our own needs. And that's what this next portion is going to be getting into with the Transition Towns movement. Observations, questions, insights?
I have a question. They talk a lot about like observation, how that can be connected. And I'm just wondering, do you think that the reason people don't see that is they just don't see it, or they don't want to see it, or is it both, or why causes that?
That's a very, very good question. It is to be able to really see is a discipline. It's very much a spiritual discipline of mindfulness when we covered that last semester, right? Being able to be completely open to what's around. But a good scientist is trained to really observe, at least in a certain portion. People don't have their training to really look and observe. But overall, observing is, right? Some of your grandmas may have said this, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? Because it's more important to listen. It's more important to understand first what's going on before we act. And so how do we do that? It's a discipline and it's a training. In some cultures, it's very natural. Those that are less, one of the deficiencies, I think, is when you have a more contemplative culture that moves a little slower, they take things in more than our hyperactive do achievement culture. When you're trying to get to achieve that, you're not going to really smell the roses or take in the roses or notice there's roses along the way. So again, countercultural, right, in ways that really aren't how we're raised and informed by our own environment. Our culture is our environment. It shapes us, right? And when they're talking in there about how can we get our needs met, you go back to that flower on that page. And our needs are not simply just food, air, and water. As we all know, we have an abundance of other needs that often are at the core of what it means to be truly poor. And it involves a lot of these other inputs into our lives, right? We need social interaction. One of the measures of happiness or even length of longevity of life is, say, after retirement, people maintain strong social networks. It maintains relationships and purpose in their lives. The more we become isolated, and our individualistic culture kind of lends us that way, the more in danger we are of not having that need met. And you guys have that basically met here by being on this beautiful campus, in a system, it's a closed bubble itself. But out there, you find out it's a lot tougher. So part of our goal overall is for having this very council exist is so that your roots go a little deeper. Because when you go out there into that desert, that wilderness that's not so hospitable or nurturing for the very best parts of you, we want you to be better prepared. These are part of the things that are seeds we hope to plant that may bear fruit for you later.
Can I actually jump into
Yeah, Jenna.
To go back to your question, I think I would add another piece to it, but I'm also very cynical conspiracy theory person, so if you want one of those answers, come to me. But I think that there is an advantage to not seeing that. If you guys think about again the chart that we had with the traditional waste disposal system and the traditional fertilizer system, you're talking about two whole systems. So the way people normally go to the bathroom and manufacturing system, and so your oil and energy like production system. And so what you're talking about is like very big interconnecting things that pick up on a lot of like a bunch of different industries. And so there's an economic advantage for all of these different industries to do things the way we do them because it keeps layering more and more things into the process. And all of those things have like a cash out in there. And so there's an economic advantage to make things really complicated on too many layers because people get, not just people, but like industries can continue to drive up profits for some things that don't necessarily need to be profit driven in that way. If you think about the composting toilet, like who profits off of like pooping in a bucket and putting it on your like on your garden, like maybe the bucket maker, but like not that much else. And so to that end, I think there really is an advantage to see things that way. But again, it's about taking a step back and realizing that the economic advantage is within its own like world or its own viewpoint, and there's a way that you can step back and find another viewpoint. So just because of the place that we commonly sit in says like here's the economic incentive, like economic incentive is your bottom line, this is what drives the decisions we make. There's the challenge is the ability to step outside of that sphere and recognize that it's only one lens that you can apply and like look at it through a different lens that would hold something else as your ultimate driving incentive, even if it's not like driving costs and profits. Maybe your ultimate incentive is more a respectful and sustainable way of being in relationship with each other.
And that is a huge, huge Pandora's box I didn't necessarily want to open up, but I'm very glad Jenna introduced it, because one of the assumptions in our culture is continuous growth is, continuous growth and indefinite growth indefinitely is a given. When you're dealing with a closed system, system of amount of, there's only so many resources, so many people, so much air, you have limits. But our assumption about our economic model is that there are no limits. When it was first developed, there was this overwhelming abundance of natural resources that human beings couldn't wrap their mind around. Well, now we can. And now we're actually running out of, you'll see, maybe it's another video, we use up 1.5 Earths right now with how much we consume. And that can no longer continue to grow. But one of the parts of the model is to always find another niche and another way to make a profit. For those of you who have, so this is what we're talking about with an industrial model or a linear way of thinking. Right now, and you business majors in here have a tremendous ability to make a difference if you see this point, right? One of the flaws that we are going to have to adapt to and move away from is simply thinking of A to B, like our whole purpose is just financial growth and profit, right? That's the only purpose. There's another way, many of you probably run into this, of thinking a sustainable economics factors in 3 things. The people, so the benefit of them, things like fair trade, fair wages, the ability to have work with dignity, the earth, so having the environment be sustained, and then profit. They're all weighed together because in the long term, they have to be. Otherwise, you have revolutions, or you have an earth that can no longer sustain life. So that's where we're going. And part of the way that it's going to be very difficult to get there is because it means in some ways going forward sometimes is going to look like going backwards. Servant leaders turn the world upside down on their heads. And when you see that permaculture, it looks more like an overgrown lot. But I want you to start to see the Garden of Eden, right? The initial image of abundance. Because the tough thing is, and Transition Towns is going to explore this a little bit, it means drawing the wealth and the exchanges along margins, edges, markets, right, more and more locally so that people can get their needs met as much as possible right nearby. But what that does is means that wealth is spread out a lot more amongst those on the local level and not centralized at at a certain point, a very large, transnational corporations grow larger and larger. Banks grow larger and larger. There's advantages to that, but there are also disadvantages to that. And perhaps I'm going on too much at length, but I hope I'm giving you a sense, and you'll see this is one of the speakers alluding to, he keeps doing this. Our assumptions are this. The way we plan our communities is this. Why we have so many roads and things spread out, we think or have historically thought. That's just the way it's going to be. But our generation is a new challenge. And as Thomas Berry, who we started out the whole semester on, at orientation says, this era, the great work of our generation is to find a mutually beneficial existence with the earth. So how can we actually do things that create life and allow biodiversity to flourish? That is thrilling to me. That, to me, is God's work. Listening to this is listening to God's work. If you want to theologize it a little bit, that's what I've always been looking at and wondering why we're not listening more. Hasn't this been figured out? No. We are an adolescent culture, and forgive me, adolescents, it's an important stage of our lives where we separate from our parents, and we know better than our parents. But we're starting to come to that point where we realize, maybe mom and dad had it figured out all along. Just a little theory. Alex?
I just have a question. There's just this terrifying thought where, since it's a grassroots movement, right? How long will it take before the majority of the population who gets most of their information from the media, how long will it take till they realize, we're running out of supplies here? And it's just a terrifying thought that it's going to be too late by then.
Yeah, and the media is not necessarily going to help that, right? The media your psyche is built to pay attention to danger first and foremost. And right now that question may lead us to think differently than ways that profit. And those industries you have media because people pay for commercials. And the people that pay for commercials don't want you to have things that are, covered that are counter to their own financial livelihood. So it's kind of built in. As they say, the industrial model has this positive feedback loop where things just keep getting bigger and bigger and more. Whereas the negative feedback loop, which is kind of the way this is termed on that chart there, is that you immediately know, I can't plant stuff there, it floods. I can't do that. You learn right away. But the positive feedback loops are oftentimes things we can't see. Again, I'm going into volumes of material, and I had to spend 16 days just to start to scratch the surface of this with some of these books. So I'm overloading you guys for sure, and we're not even going to get to transition. I would love to keep talking more, but maybe let me just say this, and we can continue to have questions if you'd like, but I want to be mindful of all the hard work the pod has done. And that's why we have these dinners too. I'm more than willing to keep talking about this. I love this. I was looking for this. I found something. I found it. And it's something we don't have here yet. So the idea was, Rob Hopkins was a permaculturist working in a town in Ireland. And they were looking at, in the early part of the last decade, the oil issue was getting a greater concern, because I originally drove a Jeep Cherokee. It was my first car that I got handed down, right? And I got rid of it in 2001 because gas was $1.89 a gallon and I couldn't take it anymore, right? In the 80s, it was 79 cents. Now we're at $4. There's a reason for that. He's going to allude to it. Now, why do we say that? Think about anything in this room, on your body or otherwise, that does not involve oil in its production or its transportation. And this is our weak link. So, Rob, take it over.
I am the author of the Transition Handbook from Oil Dependency to Local Resilience, and this is a litre of oil. Oil has become the lifeblood of how we feed, entertain and house ourselves. Indeed, it's what makes our modern lifestyles possible. This bottle of motor oil contains energy equivalent to mine working hard physically for about 5 weeks. And any time you go to a garage and fill your tank with 40 litres of petrol, you're putting into that car energy equivalent to about 4 years hard human manual labour, all for £50. And many experts argue that we're now entering the end of the age of cheap oil, what we call peak oil, the point beyond which world oil production enters a terminal decline. And that, coupled with the climate change agenda, which argues that really the best place for this is to stay in the ground, means that we need to rethink a number of very basic assumptions about how we live in this century. Central to the Transition Handbook is the concept of resilience. And resilience is an idea which emerges from the study of ecology, which is a system, whether it be an
we were about 2 days away from a food crisis in this country, because it became clear that we dismantled a lot of the resilience that has underpinned our food system up until now, and replaced it with very fragile, long supply chains. Behind me here in the centre of Totnes in Devon is a car park, a landscape you'll see up and down the country. But this car park was, until 1980, a commercial market garden. A series of glass houses filled this car park behind me here, and they grew fruit, flowers and vegetables which were supplied then through a shop on the high street. So really, when we often hear this term food miles, what we had here in Totnes up until then was a system of food feeds. And as our globalised economy and long supply chains becomes increasingly unfeasible, local solutions like this will increasingly come to the fore. And I would argue that walking to work in the morning through this as a commercial market garden, people coming and going, things growing, would be a far more enjoyable way to start the day, and a far richer contribution to our urban fabric than just a bog standard car. Welcome to the Office of Transition Town Totnes. Transition Town Totnes is the UK's first transition initiative, and it was unleashed, is the term that we used, in September last year. We used to use the term transition towns to describe all of these projects, but the whole process is growing so quickly that it's no longer a useful term, but we're now also looking at transition cities, transition villages, transition islands and peninsulas and so on. So really, we use this term transition initiatives now to describe the bigger scale of what's happening. So what is a transition initiative? Well, it's basically a process which acts as a catalyst within the community to get people to explore themselves responses to peak oil and climate change. So it comes from a position of trying to develop a really attractive, enticing vision of how the town could be beyond its current dependence on oil and fossil fuels. So it's based on a very simple premise, which is that the future with less oil could be preferable to the present if we can engage with enough imagination, creativity and adaptability in that process. There's no reason why the imagination and ingenuity that got us up to the top of the peak in the first place is going to disappear when we have to start working out how we're going to get down the other side. So this process here in Totnes has been very dynamic since it was unleashed in 2006. Some of the things that have come out of it are things like the Totnes pound, which is the local currency system that we've set up.
Yes, of course.
Local currencies allow exchange to keep happening inside, so wealth is built up inside a smaller community.
Things like the Totnes Local Food Directory, which lists all the local producers and places that sell local food. We started a project called Totnes, the Nut Tree Capital of Britain, which is about planting nut trees within the urban fabric of the town, both as an awareness-raising issue and also as a food security project. We've been doing work in local schools through the Transition Tales project, which is about working with young people to get them visioning to what life beyond oil could be like. We run a series of talks in open space, community think tank days, and recently, as a sister project to Transition Town Totnes, we saw the launch of Tresol, the Totnes Renewable Energy Society, which is a community investment organisation where people can invest money to start putting in place renewable energy infrastructure. So change need not be a hair shirt exercise. It can be something which is exhilarating, has a feel of being a historic process, and is a collective call to adventure. We often use the term that what transition initiatives are about is unlocking the collective genius of the community to explore these questions. The Transition Handbook is available from Green Books, all good bookshops, and from www.transitionculture.org.
The lights. Thank you, Jax. So we are running short on time, but in essence, this handbook is a tremendous how-to manual, right? I use it in my class. We spent more or less the last weeks of the semester trying to create initiatives here on campus or design their final projects or kind of transition initiatives for our campus. But the beauty of it is it approaches things very differently than typical environmentalism or other movements, in that the way this is broken down is into three major sections. The head, what are the facts we have to look at that we're ignoring or not looking at? Why small is inevitable, and why resilience is far more important than sustainability. Sustainability means we can get our needs met today, as well as ensure that the future's needs are met. means nothing. There's nothing in there that says we have to be able to endure Hurricane Sandy a little more effectively. We have to make sure our communities are resilient so that when one thing goes down, right, there are other things that take its place. In a permaculture design, there are what you call elements. A chicken is an element, a tree is an element, and every element performs multiple functions, right? Not like a linear thing, like this tree is just good for paper. This tree has 100 functions. Dr. Kieda tried to illuminate some of them for you, but everything from soil structuring to carbon sequestration to providing a canopy for other trees, others to grow, fruits, you name it. They are nature's pinnacle of the plant kingdom. And they perform all kinds of functions. But if we only look at them as if what it can do for me or what it's useful for in terms of paper products or this, that, and the other, we miss the gift and the point. And Alex, this was an idea I wanted to get back to after your question. Why don't we let people know that this scary thing's coming? This shift is built upon a shift in our thinking more than almost anything else. Because right now, we have a scarcity system. There's not enough food, there's not enough money, there's not enough, and it leads us to compete with one another. It leads us to, ravage the land because we need to have more. We need to have more, and there's a sense of scarcity. The alternative to that is abundance. And abundance isn't just we figured out how to get more and more and more. Abundance is observing. Abundance is listening. Abundance is what positive psychology says, having a disposition of gratitude. Because now you see, maybe in that first video, normal person would say, what I want, what we need desperately is more food and land to be able to handle it. Let's level it. What a permaculturist or a servant leader who listens will do and say, look at those contours on that hill. We build a little ditch and it'll save the water for us. Look at the way the sun rises and sets. We can put plants here to shade the ones that will get destroyed by the sun. What is it giving us? What do we have? And that second video asked that question, what our needs are. Positive psychology has done a really amazing job, and I use these TED Talks in my class to show that there's a certain level of well-being or wealth to which contributes to our happiness. And it's somewhere around $50,000 to $75,000 depending on where you live. Beyond that, the measures of happiness to wealth, it flattens off. There's almost no more substantial scientific, psychological contribution to your health by having more than what you just may need to have access to it within your own world, right? A middle class kind of level. And there's lots of creative ways to get your needs met that don't necessarily have to do with paying for something so much as this idea of a gift culture to one another. So you guys heard of couch surfing, right? Hotels really don't like that idea. I don't know. We need hotels, but the idea that someone would actually invite you into their home, you meet other people, your world, your network expands, and you're sleeping on somebody else's couch for free. We have tremendous abundance and tremendous possibilities. It's a countercultural turn in our thinking, flipping things upside down and say, what do we have? Right? So this is basically a how-to as to how to do it in a community. And there are certain key steps to that. Back here, good old chapter 10. And just while I'm looking for that when they created their own currency, it's because they call it one of the modes of creating local resilience is creating what we have in the wildcard office, a local currency. You need a global currency so exchange can happen on a larger level, but at the smaller level, what happens? If you can only use that money there, every time that those totness pound is exchanged, wealth is created inside your own local community, right? And it incentivizes that because you can get a totness pound for 90 cents. It's usually like a 10% discount. Lots of towns and places in America have adopted this. This transition towns, this movement, we could show a graph, but I couldn't get one of the PowerPoints up. It's all over the world. And one of the things we're going to look at last, Jess, would you bring up that final website? It's in our backyard. Some people might even be from this wonderful place. The one on the far right. think that, keep going, yeah. The first fair trade town in the United States was Media, Pennsylvania. They're now working on becoming the first transition town in the United States, or one of, right? If not, they are. But you can see the areas. What happens is they simply use that good old Christian value of inclusion. Jesus likes everybody at the table, and you start talking. And you start figuring out who's interested in what. What are your passions? What are you invested in? What would you like to see done? And they start to get to work. It's, again, it's not this top-down idea. It's a bottom-up idea. Actually, I should take that back. Integrated thinking is top-down thinking, but bottom-up action. We're going to look at the whole picture, but we're going to start with the grassroots, because only the people on the ground know what they want or know how to do things best, because they're closest to it. That's also the idea behind the Catholic social teaching principle of subsidiarity. Why do I keep throwing these things out? Because there's kind of a pattern of these things that really work. Kind of the way Jesus did his thing, kind of the way nature does its thing, there's a pattern. So part of being a good observer is recognizing the patterns that persist, and recognizing, maybe asking questions beyond that. So in here, it's a how-to for communities to start, and stories of other communities that have done this. I hope it wasn't entirely too vague. So did you guys, who didn't understand what a transition town is? You need a little bit of elaboration on it. Because I'm offering too much commentary and not enough just basic facts here. I apologize. Got a little Dr. Kieda in me, you know? Okay. So I think with that, maybe we should transition. Jess, you're in charge.